George nodded as SIO started to register the full implications of the comparatively massive Death Welder's implication that she'd be a good mate for him. Exactly. And like I said, your anatomy as well. His eyes swept up and down. SUA. Ease form, and she got the distinct feeling she should be concerned by the way he was looking at her. If very attractive to a male of my species. Some have different tastes, but you suit mine incredibly well. So especially now that you've got my brain firing that way, please explain your species' anatomy, and I'll explain mine, and hopefully we can get my mind off how incredibly beautiful you are. Blushed Kobold again. What do you want to know? Cardiopulmonary organ, if you have one. Respiratory functions. Central processing facilities. Generally important chemicals. Sensory organs, and the methods of your digestive system. Seem like some good basics. George replied after a moment of contemplation. Would you like me to go first? Noted with a small smile. If you wouldn't mind. George pointed to his head. My body's central processing unit. My brain is encased in my skull. A nice tough shell of bone. There are soft spots here, and here. He pointed to his eyes, ears, and the bottom of his jaw. In the event you ever have to fight a human. These are good spots to aim for if you have a bladed weapon. They're also our major sensory organs, so it's rather crippling to lose one. But don't bank on it finishing them immediately. It should, but there are infamous stories of those among my kind sustaining massive brain damage and surviving for decades. Effery. Boo. Blinked in shock, your brain. The bit that tells your body to keep functioning. Your people can have that damaged severely and keep functioning. George shrugged. Well, I mean, if you splatter it all over the wall like an egg, then no. But there was at least one guy, I think his name was Phineas Gage or something, had a metal rod blow clean through his jaw and get lodged in his brain. He walked himself to the hospital to have it removed and then lived for at least a couple of years after that. Oh so, W. Shuddered slightly at the thought of it. Are these things immortal? George nodded. I'm pretty sure an injury like that would kill most humans. But nothing's ever a guarantee. There's also my spine, another pretty important bit. He turned and gestured to his back. If you run your hand down the middle of my back there, you'll feel a little ridge of bone. That's the most important and central root of my nervous system. Again, not an absolute must. Plenty of people live with terrible spine damage. They might never walk again, or be paralyzed in their whole body, which you ask me is worse than death. But they've got a pretty good chance of living so long as the command routes to their vitals are intact. Ellie ran her fingertips tentatively down the section of back George had indicated and suppressed another fearful shudder. So what exactly can kill something like you if even directly damaging the most important and central root of your nervous system isn't even remotely guaranteed to? George turned, still smiling in a very friendly manner, and moved SW, Gira slightly off-center of his upper torso. E blinked as she felt faint thumping beneath the fabric. Your cardiopulmonary center. George nodded happily. That's right. Mine will probably give out on me another 40 years or so. Everyone in my family's had that problem about age 70. But my grandfather lived to almost 80 with a pacemaker. By the time he got tired of being in and out of the hospital so much and decided to move on, he only had about a tenth of his heart still functioning. On either side of my heart, there are my lungs, my respiratory organs. Can get by with only one of those, but I understand it's not easy or fun. And then, the quickest way to the affections of any male of my species, he lowered her hand to his lower torso, which she could feel wasn't as hard as his upper torso. The stomach, our digestive tract. Well, second quickest, he amended. Mating probably takes the cake on that one, if you'll pardon my language. You blushed slightly again. You seem to have, quite a fixation on that. George blushed faintly and scratched the back of his head. Oh yeah, sorry about that. I should probably explain. My species is mammalian in ER. Our females give live birth to only a few offspring at a time, and given how much time and effort raising little ones requires, very few couplings produce more than a small handful of offspring. On top of that, we're all in constant competition with each other over mates. Having an attractive mate is, well, I'm not sure it would be called an out-and-out mark of prestige, but it's certainly something every human wants. Some common traits we look for are symmetry of features, which indicate good genetics, large mammary glands, which we instinctively know are good for feeding our young since they can't process a non-liquid diet for the first several months, and decent hips and thighs, which are where our females carry the young prior to birthing, and have many of the important nutrients our little ones need while in utero. A thin waist. He patted the region in question, is also favorable among many of my people, myself included, because it speaks of a healthy diet and lifestyle. Looked down at herself as understanding dawned on her. So you look at me and see all those things which makes you think I'd be a favorable mate. Now I get it. She smiled up at him. That's why you risked your own planet to save mine. You're just like a Plusu. George thought about that for a moment with a look that wiped the smile off. E.S. face in an instant. What's a Plusu? I'm trying to decide if I should be offended or not. No, vented an internal sigh of relief. Plusu are my planet's apex predators. They're mammalian like you, except they're quadrupedal and they have tails and claws and long-shaped heads with mouths full of vicious sharp fangs. They live in packs and will do anything to protect their pack. What I meant was that I'm big and scary and considered you my pack because you look like a potential mate. George nodded. Fair enough. I'll accept being called a Plusu. E.O. smiled, and then froze as George's gaze sharpened. But if I find out a Plusu is anything like a dog, then you'd better at least scratch my ears for me? Got it. Your ears. Stammered. Why would you want me to scratch you? George snorted with a small smile. It's a gesture of affection from humans to dogs. They're one of my people's oldest companion species. Many of us like our dogs better than most other humans. We scratch their heads and the base of their ears gently because it feels good for them. Us too, actually. Also the backs and stomachs. I don't think I'd ever have the courage to scratch a Plusu. Admitted as she returned the smile. George suddenly sat down, which put his head approximately even with OWAT's lower torso. Would you like to scratch mine while you explain your anatomy to me? Miss Earl smiled at the gesture and tentatively reached out to rub George's hair. I'm good. But George just chuckled and leaned into the gentle touch as R.O. began to relax and explain her own species' anatomy.